Sprint 9. Effective communication skills. The most basic of all relationships is communicating. You communicate with many people, whether you like it or realize it. There are cooperating, competing, and retreating types of communications, and you need to tell them apart and use the right one for all the points and communicating you need to do to lead a startup. Most communication is done poorly, so it's easy to just assume that communicating is too hard to master or that it requires charisma. This is Bunk, and we will explain why and help you be respected as someone people trust to communicate the things they need to know and understand. This sprint gives an overview and basic understandings of how and why communication is the most basic type of relationship. We explain this in our following article. After that, we challenge you with some questions about how you communicate. Communicating is the most basic and important relationship. Written and read by Derek Liedau.
The most basic and fundamental of all relationships is formed when two parties communicate. No powerful and productive relationships can form without communication. Communicating always has the shared objective of accurately transferring information and emotion between two people. Understanding the strategies that improve accurately transferring information and emotion is essential to the effectiveness of people working together. Some behaviors look like communication, but aren't. We often confuse communication with broadcasting. Broadcasting is when you send a message, but you do not follow up to see if it has been received accurately. Broadcasting is not caring if a shared objective has been created or the payoff has been received. Writing an email and sending it to a large distribution list, and then assuming that it has been read, is not communicating. Neither is posting on social media. It is broadcasting. Communication means both parties participate. It's not a symmetrical relationship because the sender and receiver play different roles. The sender has the information and emotion that she wants to share with the receiver, whether the receiver wants it or not. This is why communication can be cooperative, competing, or retreating based upon whether the information and emotion being sent is something the other person wants to receive. Asking for feedback is important. Anyone who wants to make sure information or emotion has been accurately transferred to someone else needs to ask for feedback. Most people who want to know whether their message has been received accurately look for visual clues to get the feedback that they need. Some people are more adept at reading visual clues, and this ability is a trait that is measured as part of EQ. Of course, many communications are not done face-to-face or are done between people who are not good at reading visual clues about whether the transmitted information and emotion have been accurately understood. It's easy for anyone, including a founder, to make sure a communication he sends is accurately received. He just has to ask, did that make sense? What did you hear? Or even better, what else would you like to know about this? The role of the receiver. People receiving information and emotion should want to make sure they have accurately received the message. People we think of as a good listener naturally give us feedback on whether they understand the information or emotion we sent. Good listeners are people with whom we know we have done a good job communicating. They make it easy. Indeed, good listeners can play the lead role in improving an otherwise poorly constructed communication. These techniques are hallmarks of good listeners. Nodding or saying "aha" is an indication that the listener is not confused by the consistency of the information and emotion being sent. This is not a true positive confirmation, but it indicates that the message makes sense. Paraphrasing what the listener has heard is a positive confirmation of the accuracy of the communication. and it precludes the sender from having to ask the follow-up question. The most basic form of paraphrasing is, I understand what you just said to mean. Communicating back is an implication of the information or emotion that was transferred. For example, what you said means that you must be very unhappy. This is the most powerful form of good listening because it leads to the most accurate and timely exchange of information and emotion. Being a good listener always makes communication cooperative, even if the receiver does not agree with the information or emotion being communicated. Cooperative communications are always best because both parties know the information and emotion has been accurately received, so there are no misunderstandings and each party can independently decide what to do about it. Naive communications cause problems. Unskilled communicators often assume their communication is cooperative, but sometimes engage in behavior that makes their communication retreating or competing. Communication becomes retreating when the receiver of the information ignores the transmission. Not responding to an email asking you a question is a retreat. So is changing the subject. Founders should never leave an email from a teammate, customer, or other stakeholder unread for any extended period. Even when she goes on vacation, the founder needs to delegate someone to read and respond to all of her relevant emails unless she plans to do that herself while lying on the beach in Hawaii. The founders should never change the subject. You can always say, I understand that you do not like the new coffee we've chosen, so let Bill know your opinion and he may decide to change it. Or the founder could say, I promise to return to hear whatever it is you want to tell me, but I must run now to meet an important commitment. Competitive communications. Communication can easily turn competitive. For example, the sender may try to get the receiver to tacitly agree to something as part of receiving the message. Aggressive senders can try to establish their dominant status by intimidating the receiver with strong negative emotions, judgmental phrases, or name-calling. An opposite tactic can also be employed, wherein the sender tries to lure the receiver into reciprocating their agreeableness or effusive praise with an acceptance of their position. The sender may try to manipulate the receiver's feedback as to the information and emotion that was sent. Asking a closed-in question is often competitive. Do you prefer X or Y? What this seeks to constrain the receiver to make a choice the receiver may not wish to make. The receiver may compete by refusing to acknowledge receipt of the information and emotion. The receiver can attempt to take over the communication by immediately forcing the sender to respond to an onslaught of communications. For example, what you're saying makes no sense at all. What you're saying is a waste of my time to even listen to. They can use aggressive emotions, such as, it infuriates me that you waste my time with nonsense, with the implication that their emotions are more important than whatever was in your message. Finally, the receiver of the information may try to change the message he has received to gain advantage over the sender. The receiver may purposely say he understood a different message. So, you're not going to prevent me from taking your car to Las Vegas tonight. Competitive communication is often not openly declared, and one party may not realize what is at stake. These covertly competitive forms of communication are often referred to as manipulations. There is an important distinction between a communication being competitive and the information and emotion being transmitted relating to a competition. It is not competitive to communicate, I do not agree with what you said, or even, I will fight your proposal. It is not competitive communication-wise for the receiver to demonstrate that she accurately received the information by saying, I look forward to your fighting my proposal. These examples accurately convey information important to both parties and are good examples of cooperative communication. Unfortunately, we sometimes do not even realize when we are being manipulative with our communication. Who doesn't sometimes ask a very direct yes or no question or cut off further discussion? When effective communication is important, a founder wants to make sure that his communication is clearly cooperative. The importance of open-ended questions. A founder can ensure the cooperative intent of any communication by asking an open-ended question and then demonstrating good listening skills when the receiver responds to the question. An open-ended question is one that does not predispose a particular answer. For example, how would you suggest I solve this problem? Open-ended questions invite the receiver to be in the position of controlling the information and emotion being transferred and puts the sender in the position of being a listener. The cost of asking open-ended questions is that the communication often takes longer, and some or all of the information and emotion received may not be relevant. In spite of your good intentions in asking an open-ended question, the receiver could still give a competitive or retreating response. Even though open-ended questions require more time and patience, they're a good strategy for diffusing competitive communication and competitive emotions, as well as for striking up conversations with strangers. Identifying competitive and retreating communication helps a founder do a better job of conveying critical information and emotions while also helping others do it. Because communication is the starting point for all relationships, being able to identify cooperative, competing, and retreating communication helps create more effective relationships everywhere within an enterprise.
Sprint exercise. Now that you've read or listened to our article, Communicating is the Most Basic and Important Relationship, we challenge you with some questions about how you communicate. When do you broadcast instead of setting up a cooperative communication relationship? What are the different ways you set up a retreating communication relationship? When and how are you provoked into creating a competing communicating relationship? Sprint exercise. Now that you've read or listened to our article, Communicating is the Most Basic and Important Relationship, we challenge you with some questions about how you communicate. When do you broadcast instead of setting up a cooperative communicating relationship? What are the different ways you set up a retreating communicating relationship? When and how are you provoked into creating a competing communicating relationship? What is the payoff the other person wants that you do not want them to have? How do you best indicate that you are accurately receiving the information and emotion another party is transferring? Sprint exercise. Now that you've read or listened to our article, Sprint exercise. Now that you've listened or read to Sprint exercise. Now that you've read or listened to our article, Communicating is the Most Basic and Important Relationship, we challenge you with some questions about how you communicate. When do you broadcast instead of setting up a cooperative communicating relationship? What are the different ways you set up a retreating communicating relationship? When and how are you provoked into creating a competing communicating relationship? What is the payoff the other person wants that you do not want them to have? And how do you best indicate that you are accurately receiving the information and emotion another party is transferring?